Donald Trump should persuade Putin to sit down at the negotiating table with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, said U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance in an interview with Fox News. He suggested that negotiations between President Zelensky and the Russian dictator are unlikely to be productive before speaking with Trump. According to Vance, Washington is working out the schedule and other details of the three-way meeting so that the leaders can discuss ending Russia's war against Ukraine. For now, there is an agreement for President Trump to hold talks with Putin on August 15th in Alaska. Let's now figure out what the head of the Kremlin is bringing to the table there. Putin is trying to regain the initiative and is constantly looking for opportunities to engage in dialogue with Washington. For the Kremlin dictator, a face-to-face meeting with the U.S. president is a unique chance to try to win back the favor of the American leader and show Russians how he interacts with the world's most powerful figures. But Moscow has already made a serious mistake. It suddenly started voicing its claims to the American state of Alaska. By the way, this is a favorite topic among Putin's inner circle. Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council Medvedev and State Duma Speaker Volodin have repeatedly threatened to take Alaska away from the United States. This time, it was Putin's aide who brought up this American state. Statements by officials of such rank in the Russian Federation cannot be made without authorization.
Yuri Ushakov stated that Alaska is a logical meeting place, since the U.S. and Russia are close neighbors on either side of the Bering Strait and share common economic interests in Alaska and the Arctic region. He called Alaska an American born in Russia. From the report of the Institute for the Study of War.
As the New York Times writes, the summit fits into Putin's worldview, according to which great powers divide spheres of influence much like Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill did in 1945. That is precisely why the Russian dictator is so persistent in promoting the idea of territorial exchange, including territories that the Russian army has not managed to capture since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized, there will be no exchange of Ukrainian territory for Ukrainian territory. For Kyiv, such rhetoric is absolutely unacceptable, the head of state stated. However, the United States quickly put the Kremlin in its place.
There will be no large tracts or, as you understand, territories simply handed over without a fight and without merit on the battlefield. But I return to what I started with, namely, that we need to end this war in order to save thousands of lives through an agreement.
Putin has repeatedly called the collapse of the Soviet Union supposedly the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. For him, the seizure of Ukraine is not a whim, but an obsession. In reality, the Kremlin thought it would only take a few days. Ukraine broke the plans for Putin's blitzkrieg, and for more than 3 years the Russian army has been trying to occupy Ukrainian territories. The aggressor country has lost more than 1 million soldiers, tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, and a significant part of its Black Sea fleet. Ukraine's defense forces are destroying targets inside Russia itself, and the Kursk operation showed that the Ukrainian armed forces can operate effectively on enemy territory. In every round of negotiations in Istanbul, the Russian delegation demanded things that the Russian army could not achieve on the battlefield. At the upcoming meeting with Trump, Putin is unlikely to back down from his maximalist demands, according to the New York Times.
President Trump is absolutely determined to see this war through to the end, but also to put maximum pressure on Putin. And next Friday will be important, because it will test Putin how seriously he takes this whole process, which will have to continue after Friday, involving Ukraine and others, in order to bring this war to an end.
The Kremlin's notion that Russia is on par with world powers like the United States is not supported by anything. What about a strong economy? The Russian Federation still survives by selling resources, a commodity that fewer and fewer buyers want because of sanctions and the global reorientation of markets. Even Russian economists are predicting a recession in the country's economy in 2026. Russia's budget deficit has reached $54 billion, confirmed Andriy Yermak, the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. As for Putin's pride, the military industry, maybe the Russian defense sector really has reached a new level? Doubtful. The Russian Federation has managed to ramp up drone production, but otherwise, its successes are limited. The army is suffering heavy losses in local assaults, while Ukrainian UAVs are effectively destroying enemy armored vehicles, weaponry, and military facilities. The Kremlin is increasingly dependent on supplies of shells and soldiers from North Korea.
Russia has long been a country with limited agency, completely dependent on selling energy resources to the global south, on weapons and ammunition from North Korea, on foreign technologies, and on schemes to circumvent sanctions. Such a country is certainly no match for either the US or China, and it definitely doesn't decide anything in the post-Soviet space, in Europe, the Caucasus, or the Middle East. Putin's desire to create a world where Europe resolves regional issues not only with the US but also with Russia is pathetic in its logic. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
On the international stage, partnership with Russia has long become toxic. All the regimes that the Kremlin has called friendly are well aware of the price of Russian support. Iran, which provided the Federation with military assistance and supplied drones, never received reciprocal support from its ally. Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria also didn't get any help from Moscow. Yerevan watched all of this very closely. Armenia, which until recently relied on Moscow, turned to Washington. As a result, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, with the participation of US President Donald Trump, signed a declaration on peaceful relations. So long time, 35 years.
It's been a long road. They fought for 35 years, and now they're friends, and they'll remain friends for a long time to come. But for me, it is a great honor to welcome everyone to the White House for this historic peace summit between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This is truly a very exciting moment for me. I love seeing good people come together. And that's exactly what you're witnessing. You have two great leaders here. I want to congratulate these two visionary individuals, Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Aliyev.
Nikol Pashinyan and Ilham Aliyev signed the declaration not just without Moscow's participation. They did it demonstratively, at the White House. The Kremlin was simply cut out of the process. For a country that not long ago considered itself the main arbiter in the South Caucasus, this is a painful signal. Russia has lost not only its status as a world power, but also its role as a regional leader.
This deal is yet another blow to Russia's weakening influence in the region. As Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan leads his predominantly Christian country toward the West and, ultimately, the EU. Russia, which still maintains a military base in Armenia, seems unable to counter Trump's initiative, partly because of its preoccupation with Ukraine. From a publication by The Guardian.
Moscow remained silent for a whole day, watching as Armenia and Azerbaijan signed a peace declaration in Washington, brokered by Donald Trump. Only later did Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zakharova manage to comment on the situation. She stated that supposedly, to resolve the conflict in the South Caucasus, only countries from the region and their neighbors should be involved, naming Russia, Iran, and Turkey among them. In other words, not the United States. And finally, she reminded everyone that Russian troops are still stationed in Armenia. This sounded more like an attempt to save face than a real position. So, to sum up, allies are leaving, partners are forming new alliances, and Moscow is increasingly left out of key developments. It's under these circumstances that Putin is heading to meet with Trump. No strong economy, no military victories, no real levers of influence. And to issue ultimatums in such a situation is, to put it mildly, overconfident.